Hello students, let's talk about chapter 8 in lifespan development. So this is about the socio-emotional development of children that are at middle and late childhood. So last time we talked about their development, their physical and cognitive development. But this time we will talk about their socio-emotional development. So this will continue on some of the themes from a couple chapters ago, but it's also relevant to their cognitive development and physical development. So let's get into that. Let's talk about the personality and the self. So the self has been a topic that we've touched on with all these chapters on socio-emotional development because it is really important to understand your own self to then understand where other people are coming from as well. So hopefully you see the pattern of how this has changed over time up to this point. So self-understanding, that's the descriptions of yourself, and they usually include more psychological traits rather than concrete characteristics. So, well, at this point in time. So earlier in the lifespan, you might remember a lot of the perceptions of the own self were very concrete things. So the child has brown hair, or a child is tall, things like that. Versus now, a lot more psychological traits are part of their self-understanding. So are they helpful? Are they popular? Are they smart? Are they nice? We'll actually talk a little bit today about popular kids versus unpopular kids and where that falls on this developmental cascade. Does it have positive outcomes, negative outcomes, those kinds of things. Perspective taking increases in middle and late childhood. A lot of that's because of their cognitive processing. They're able to imagine themselves in someone else's shoes rather than only seeing it from their point of view. They can now do a better job at seeing where another person is coming from. This helps a lot with other things that we'll talk about today, like empathy. So, well, I guess I should have clicked forward because helping understand other people's thoughts and feelings, that's a big component of that empathy. So it's also a really important skill to have positive peer relations. If you don't understand that your peer is feeling upset or scared or happy, you're not going to respond as appropriately with them, right? So self-esteem are those global or general evaluations of the self. So I like myself or I don't like myself. I feel like I'm a good person or I don't. It's like really big, really generalized. So another one, I'm happy with who I am. That would be an example of a statement of self-esteem. This is different than self-concept. Self-concept is a lot more specific, usually domain-specific evaluations of the self. So I'm really good at research methods, or I feel like I am. So I'm a good student, or I am not a good athlete, or I'm of average appearance. So those specific domains, appearance, athleticism, if you're a student, those kinds of things. You might think, oh, I'm a good friend, or I'm a good son or daughter, or something like that. So it's more domain specific. So self-esteem is that broad general picture, like I like myself. And then self-concept is, so you might say, well, I have a positive self-esteem, so I like myself generally, but you might say, domain-specific, these self-concepts, I'm a good student, but I'm not a good athlete, and I'm of average appearance. So even though you have some of those concepts that you see yourself positively and some negatively and some average, you can still have that high self-esteem. So they're correlated, but they're not the same. Right? So if you have a lot of positive things in your self-concept, chances are your self-esteem will be higher, but not necessarily. So self-efficacy is a little different. So we had self-esteem, those broad general ideas of self, self-concept, the more focused domain-specific ideas about yourself in those specific domains, and then self-efficacy is your idea of if you can master any kind of problem or situation to produce more favorable outcomes. So I think I can do a pretty good job at editing a paper and making it sound better. I don't have very high self-efficacy on correcting a math problem that has a mistake in it. So for myself, I have high self-efficacy in that one domain, but not another. So capable of acting in a certain situation. So this is really applicable to heroism research. So a lot of heroes that have done physical acts of heroism have actually domain-specific training to help in those kinds of situations. So they have had swim training and they end up being the person to jump into a rushing river to save someone, things like that. So statements like I think I can, or I know I'll be able to do well on the exam, or I know I can learn this new dance, or I know I can solve this problem. Those are examples of statements that you would say if you had high self-efficacy, that you felt that you could affect the situation. So again, we've got self-esteem, which is broad and general, self-concept, which is ideas about yourself in specific domains, and self-efficacy, how much you feel you can change any given situation. So secure attachments in parents lead to higher self-esteem and higher self-concept. So abuse or neglect leads to lower self-esteem and self-concept. And self-esteem as well as self-concept are often inaccurate. So our own perceptions of how we can do, and especially in middle and late childhood, children's own perceptions of what they can do are oftentimes inaccurate. So that includes both the positive and negative. So if you think you're not a very good friend, your friends might rate you differently, as an example. And that's especially true in middle and late childhood. So someone might say, I'm a great student, or I'm not a very good student, and they might be completely inaccurate in that self-concept. So much research on self-esteem and what it affects is correlational. It's a really difficult variable to manipulate. It's hard to give some people higher self-esteem and then cause some people to not have high self-esteem. So you can't really do experimental studies. You're really limited to people who are reporting if they have high self-esteem or low self-esteem. And like we just talked about, people's evaluation of their performance is often off. So they might say they have a high self-esteem even when they might not feel that great about themselves, as an example. So longitudinal studies do show that social support does not seem to increase self-esteem on its own. However, self-esteem growing or diminishing seems to change the social support that people receive. So rather than social support increasing people's self-esteem, when people have higher self-esteem, they tend to get more social support. So a little bit different relationship there than you might generally think about. So self-efficacy is the one I want to focus on a little bit more right now. So again, that's the one you feel like you can do things, solve problems, or do this math problem, edit that paper, do well in a test. So low self-esteem can lead to things like obesity, anxiety, depression, suicide, delinquency, and lower life satisfaction. But achievement and growing in capacities, so gaining more self-efficacy, so learning new skills, being able to learn to solve problems better, achieving new goals, that is one of the best ways to increase self-esteem, as well as self-concept too. So self-efficacy is a critical reason why students achieve. So you can just tell students that they're really good students, that they're great people, try to boost their self-esteem, and that won't have too much effect on their performance, unfortunately. The best thing to do is actually, like we've talked about, zone of proximal development, scaffold and help them achieve, even if it's little goals at a time. That achievement and growing in capacities will increase self-efficacy, will increase the feeling that a child is capable of doing things. And so it's a really critical reason for why students achieve in elementary school, high school. So if you increase self-efficacy, self-esteem and self-concept will also rise. So when people feel like they're more capable of acting and affecting situations, that's really useful. So a statement like, if I work hard, I will be successful, is an example. So parents, teachers, mentors, all can work to help scaffold children in middle and late childhood to do better at building any capacities. So if a child is struggling with math or even great with math, helping them still grow and achieve will increase their self-efficacy, their self-concept, and their self-esteem. So just like self-concept, self-efficacy is often really domain specific. So knowing that you can learn more about psychology in this psychology class, you can grow, you can develop, get better. That can be really specific to psychology. Maybe you have tried to learn to ride a bike, especially maybe in middle or late childhood. Maybe a child's learning to ride a bike a little later than their friends. or maybe before their friends even. And so they might not feel like they can, but if they see that achievement, they will have more positive self-esteem for themselves. So this is actually kind of a slightly relevant video. It's a really great one. So let's watch it really quick and think about self-esteem for this.
Wisdom? What about for all the other kids trying to learn how to ride their bike? Can you say anything to them? Give me some thumbs up.
Thumbs up, everybody! Thumbs up, everybody! You will get the hang of it, I know it. You will get better and better, I know it. If you keep practicing, you will get better and better as you do it.
Subscribe and tell us what to sonify. Do your
So only slightly relevant to the conversation that we're having here, but relevant enough that I think it was good to watch. So as you can see, that child, probably about middle childhood age, learned how to ride a bike. And so achieved that. It increased his self-efficacy that you can learn how to ride a bike. So he's trying to encourage people. So great video. I'm just glad I didn't start singing along to it. That would have been a lot more embarrassing than just bobbing along to the song. So with that, self-regulation at this time is increasing. So we've talked about self-regulation in the past, that ability to stop yourself from doing things, impulse control, you might hear it talked about as well. So children in middle and late childhood are still getting better and better at self-regulation. So that's also important for emotions. So in middle and late childhood, their understanding of emotions improves, and as well as the fact that they are able to take other people's perspective, so they are starting to understand better other people's emotions as well. So mental time travel appears around middle and late childhood. So that means looking forward to emotions you might have in the future. So Christmas is coming up, I might get that toy I want, so I think that will make me happy. Something like that. So that mental time travel. They might even look back to emotions that they've had in the past. Well, the last time I pet a dog, it bit me and that made me scared and sad. So I don't want to pet a dog this time, as an example. So they also are understanding better that more than one emotion can occur in any given situation. So people can feel multiple emotions as a reaction to any given thing, and children are in middle childhood are starting to understand that that is a possibility. So you might have something that induces joy as well as a little bit of anxiety. So you get to be, you get into the play that you tried out for a part for, or something like that. So you're really happy, you're joyful that you got into that play, but you're also a little anxious because you're not sure how you'll do, as an example. So they are a lot more aware of their own emotional states as well as others. So they can pinpoint the source of that emotion. So something good happened, they saw a puppy, they can pinpoint what is causing them those positive or negative emotions. So I'm sad because my friend's not in school today, but I'm excited that my birthday is tomorrow. Middle children and late children can pick up on that and understand those things a lot better. And it helps a lot more for social interaction to be able to pinpoint that, well, this thing that my friend said to me made me sad, but I still like my friend at the same time. It helps with those relationships growing. So suppression and concealment of emotion also improves. So this obviously can apply to things like lying, but it can be important when we're trying to keep positive social interactions with people. So my children, when they're a little younger than this, when they get upset because I don't let them play with their phones or have a candy until after dinner time or something like that. They're not very good at suppressing or concealing those emotions. I am now the worst dad in the world, and they hate me. It's kind of sad, actually. It makes me a little bit sad, but I have the emotional capacity to like look forward and be like, well, when they're not so hungry and grumpy, they will not hate me anymore. So it does help them to be able to mask those in social situations better. So if your friend says something that makes you jealous or upset, you still want to maintain that friendship. So you might not want to display that in the moment. So middle and late childhood, you get a lot better at being able to manage the display of those emotions. And that can help a lot in those kinds of social situations where you might be upset or even scared or worried for a friend, but maybe you want to support them or something like that. So with that, it also increases, or their self-regulation is increasing during this time, and learning new strategies for redirecting feelings. Again, this is a place where socio-emotional learning that we've talked about can really help, as well as scaffolding. So teaching young people, middle and late children, how to redirect their feelings. So understanding your own emotions, self-soothe, distract yourself. So this is in a big contrast to what we saw with very young infants. So we talked way back then, many chapters ago, about how children at that age, that in infancy, don't have that ability to soothe themselves. So for example, crying it out is not a good plan, because in cuddling a child in that kind of context, it's teaching them what processes their body needs to take to calm down, because cuddling them will release hormones that decrease their cortisol levels, so their body will start to learn, like, hey, when I'm feeling this way, this is the process that I should do. So at this time, middle and late childhood, children are doing a lot better job at this generally. So it's good to teach them new skills, things like that. So at this point too is really where we can truthfully call their capacities actual empathy, because empathy is not just taking someone's perspective, it's also feeling what others feel. So from a very, very early age, even there in infancy, children can feel what other people are feeling. They might not be able to pinpoint exactly what it is or what that source is, but then when it gets to closer to middle and late childhood, they can now pinpoint, oh, I'm feeling sad because my friend's feeling sad. They can also now, they have the cognitive capacities to take that friend's perspective. Oh, my friend's feeling sad because their favorite toy broke, and I'm feeling sad because my friend is feeling sad. I can understand how they might feel when their favorite toy broke. If my favorite toy broke, that would hurt. I would feel sad as well. So that now is a actual capacity that middle and late children can have. So before, it was just that feeling and that sharing of the feelings, and it did lead to more pro-social behavior, but this capacity increases greatly in middle and late childhood. This is the first time we would really call it full-on empathy, because it has to be that emotion sharing and perspective taking. And that perspective taking didn't really exist until this point. All right, so let's watch this little video on socio-emotional learning and how to improve that for young people.
There's a lot of talk these days about SEL, social emotional learning. But what exactly is it? Social emotional learning is the process of learning social and emotional skills, and it's just as important as learning reading or math. This learning process is most effective when it begins early and continues through high school. Social emotional skills are essential for success in school.
So one point that just made is that socio-emotional learning is the most effective when it's consistently through childhood and adolescence, even through high school. I would say it would make sense also that socio-emotional learning would still be effective and important even in early adulthood, so say college age or even later on. But the structures that we have in place for a public school make it a lot easier to implement social or socio-emotional learning programs, and we don't really have formal socio-emotional learning programs in, say, college or later on in adulthood. But I imagine, just because of development and teaching and scaffolding, you could still gain those capacities later on into adulthood with specific programs like we're talking about here. But that's why it makes the emphasis on early on in childhood all the way through high school, because that's where these formal programs exist currently.
Work and life. With SEL, students learn to manage their own emotions and behaviors, have empathy and show care and concern for others, solve problems effectively, make responsible decisions, and maintain healthy relationships. Students learn to recognize what's happening inside them and to be aware of their emotions, which helps them deal with strong emotions and impulsive behaviors. It helps them stop, take a breath, and think about a situation before acting. Students learn to identify others' emotions and perspectives, which helps them empathize and show compassion, no matter who they are or what their background is. It's not difficult to imagine how this is important in the classroom and in life. Students learn to solve problems in peaceful ways and communicate assertively about what they need or want. This helps them get along with other students and get the help they need from adults. When students learn to make responsible decisions about their lives and their future, things can turn out better. Research shows social emotional learning makes a difference. Students who participate in SEL do better academically, have improved attitudes and behaviors, and act in delinquent or disruptive ways less often. In the United States, students with strong social emotional competence are twice as likely to earn a college degree and nearly 50% more likely to graduate from high school and have a full-time job by age 25. Just as important, students who are socially and emotionally competent have more friends. This means they're more likely to feel connected to school and do well, and less likely to be left out or bullied. Simply put, by participating in social emotional learning, students learn the skills to succeed in every facet of school and the rest of their lives.
So there are a lot of socio-emotional learning programs that exist, and some of them are more formalized and strict, and some are less so, just kind of more general ideas that schools try to implement, and a lot are actually combined with character education programs as well. So there's a lot of overlap between socio-emotional learning and character education, if you've heard of that term before. So CASEL, it's an acronym that I totally just forgot what the acronym stands for, but we're going to look at a website for it, so hopefully it has it listed under it. I'm trying to think of it while talking, and I can't. Character and something, I think. So a lot of the research in these CASEL-focused programs and socio-emotional learning programs look at self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. So let's look at this website, and I really want to show you the research section on this website specifically, because this research section, so here is the site, so I don't see what the acronym is for. I can't remember it offhand. So here is their site. It's linked in your PowerPoint. What I would like to show you is actually the research section of this. So you can look at all these kinds of things, SEL's impact or current research from the CASEL organization, and this will link things like evaluation reports, research reports, brief reports, as well as full text research papers. So if you're interested in socio-emotional learning or character education, this might be a good place to go. There's things that they have here, reports that are written for a lay audience, reports that are written for policymakers. So those themselves, the policymaker ones, tend to be a lot shorter, a lot more focused, have almost no data, because policymakers generally don't care much about, let's not get too political here, in a recorded video that will be online for the foreseeable future. Research has shown, let's go this way, research has shown that the most effective way, one of the most effective ways to change a policymaker's mind is to give them good stories, really relevant stories that show and demonstrate the impact of, say, a socio-emotional learning program. So rather than giving data that shows that for 100% of the students, this program worked to do X, Y, and Z, I mean, that's great data. As a scientist, I'm like, oh, that's awesome stuff. But a policymaker, it would be better to bring in 2 or 3 kids who did really well in the program and saw really good increases and improvements in their lives. Have them talk to that policymaker, tell them why it was important, tell them that really connectable story. That seems to be the most effective way to convince a policymaker to do things. So here you can look at a lot of different studies, current Castle research. So scroll through here, see if you can find anything that you want. This would be a good place to go for doing a question paper. So if that's something that you're interested in, socio-emotional learning, that is a good source for some good research. All right, so at this time in middle and late childhood, children are recognizing their stressful and anxious emotions and able to pinpoint the causes of their stress better. So, do you have an exam coming up? Is that causing you stress? Those types of things. So, it's a lot easier to teach young children coping strategies at this time. So, for example, my young children, I've taught how to take breaths and like go take a break in their room and then come back to try and solve the problem later. So, that's one good coping strategy. But kids at this age, in middle and late childhood, they can learn lots of other coping strategies and other ways to solve problems. Their capacity to understand those as well as self-regulate and use those is greatly increased. So let's talk about resilience and how to build resilience and how it can be a protective factor as well.
Of toxic stress in our children. And we all know that kids undergo a lot of different types of stress, anything from taking a big test, moving, to things more serious like parents getting divorced or having a serious injury. So how do we help kids deal with that stress? Stress can actually be positive. It can actually motivate kids, for example, to study harder for that test. But it can also have really negative repercussions too. It can lead to kids becoming depressed, even suicidal in the worst cases. It can lead to kids not taking good care of their bodies or making the wrong types of choices, like abusing drugs or alcohol. And we obviously don't want to get to that point. So if we see our kids starting to get stressed, one of the big things we can do is promote what's called resilience. Resilience is how kids deal with that stress. And there are a lot of different ways that we can promote resilience in our kids. One of them is just by having supportive, positive adults in their lives. So parents, teachers, relatives, friends, really talking to kids, validating their feelings, and just being a support person. The more support people that kids have in their lives has been shown to help reduce that toxic stress and the bad side effects from it. If you think that your kid is needing some additional help, having a professional to talk to can also be of assistance, such as a psychologist like we have here at Children's, social worker, school counselor. Those can also help build up that resilience in kids. Also promoting positive, healthy activities in kids, such as sports, extracurricular activities, or just getting outside. All of those can promote resilience, which can help combat the toxic stress.
So one thing that I find interesting from that video are the different contexts that they talk about. So talking about how parents, mentors, teachers, school counselors, they can all be people in these different contexts that a child is in that can be a support to them, and that will help reduce their stress load. So teaching them coping strategies themselves, that can be really relevant to going to a professional to learn extra coping strategies can be really effective. So finding someone who specializes in those kinds of things, even to learn lots of those kinds of techniques to help problem solve and cope with stresses, can be really useful for children. So let's jump with these to this topic that I kind of keep coming to, moral development. You might have noticed me referring to it in, I'd say, about half the lectures. That's because it's one of my favorite topics in research. So I research moral development, I research people's purpose in life and the development of heroism, but it's all really under that umbrella of moral development and kind of helping people grow and become better people that are more pro-social and helpful to each other. So this will come up again more times later in the future in chapters, but we'll hit on it a little more in detail right now too, because it is actually in the chapter in the book right now. So your book talks a lot about Kohlberg, and Kohlberg was one of the first moral developmental theories. So he thought that people, as they age, move up in their moral reasoning. So Kohlberg's theory of moral development is all centered around moral reasoning. So how you think about moral dilemmas and moral problems, how you can ration or use your rational mind to come to a decision of what to do. So you can see here we've got the pre-conventional stage, the conventional stage, and the post-conventional stage. Generally, Kohlberg thought that you got to step 6, and that was the highest, most advanced morally developed person. Interestingly, not super on top. It's more on topic than some of my tangents. Interestingly, when we see people that are awarded as, say, moral exemplars that do a lot of good for people in the world, Kohlberg might have expected that they would be in that step 6 here on this little graph. So they have their own individual principles of conscience, that they have their own ethical rules that they follow. But it's funny that we find that a lot of people who are awarded as moral exemplars and have done really great moral things tend to be in step 3 or 4, or in some things they're in 3 or 4, and some things they're in 5 or 6. So Kohlberg thought of this as a stair-step process, but there's 2 problems with Kohlberg's, well, more than that, but 2 main problems. One is that we don't actually all move straight through that in all domains. In some areas of our moral understanding and reasoning, we might be at stage 5 or stage 6, but in others, with our reasoning, we might still be around stage 3 or stage 4. And Kohlberg didn't explicitly say that it's better to be at stage 6 than, say, stage 3, but based on like the writings and the examples, you can tell that there was kind of that opinion that higher your stage, the better or more moral you were. The second big problem with morals, or Kohlberg's theories of moral development, is that they are really only focused on that moral reasoning. So to be a moral person at stage 6, you had to reason and use your rational mind at that stage 6. But that doesn't mean you actually have to be doing moral or pro-social behaviors. So that's another weakness of that theory, but it's a good place that we started in understanding moral development. So with that, now we see that moral exemplars often fall in the post-conventional, or don't often fall in the post-conventional level. So again, not those top ones, but actually closer to 3 and 4, which is really interesting. People that are generally considered really moral. I mentioned that it's focused on rationale and like that reasoning, moral reasoning. Moral reasoning is still a very important, critical part of our understanding and study of moral development today. But Kohlberg's theories did ignore behavior, moral values, moral emotions. It was all centered around that reasoning, and a little bit on cognition too. So moral emotions are a really important part of moral development, especially in early childhood and middle childhood and late childhood. So as we talked, children are gaining the capacity to understand their emotions better, to be able to feel all of empathy, and so their capacity for moral emotions has increased at this time in middle and late childhood. So guilt, I think we've mentioned this before in class, is a moral emotion that will generally drive us to fix a mistake. If we have hurt someone, let's say a child accidentally hit someone in the head with a frisbee or something like that. You might feel guilty for that as the child and then want to fix that. Say, I'm sorry, get them an ice pack, something like that. So guilt is a moral emotion because it drives you to fix that mistake. It drives you to act morally. Empathy is another moral emotion that we can take people's emotions, we can feel them ourselves, we can take their perspective with our minds, and at this point in middle and late childhood, children are capable of that now. So it helps you to help people when you see that someone needs something or is sad or hurt. This can be really helpful. So at the age of 5, children are still struggling to take that perspective of other people, but into middle and then late childhood, they have that capacity, and so they can show full-on empathy. So moral emotions are the foundation for moral values. Feeling these things and having it drive behavior, being reinforced for those behaviors, and those emotions themselves give you these values that are essentially your beliefs and attitudes about the way things should be. So an example of something that is close to a moral value is, so with that, I guess before I give an example, so these beliefs and attitudes about the way things should be are about the things that should be within different contexts and social aspects of people. So as an example, maybe you feel a lot of empathy and concern for people who maybe don't have a home. So your moral value then might develop, you might develop a belief or an attitude that people should be housed. And then based on that, you might make decisions on that, right? So if you have a moral value, a belief or attitude that the way things should be is that people should be housed, then you can take steps and actual behaviors to make that happen, right? So whether it's donating to places, building houses, creating squats for people to live in, things like that are different ways that you could then go and act on those moral values. So these moral emotions like guilt, empathy, there's a lot of other moral emotions. Feel free to ask me for a paper on it. There's some really good ones. And then those emotions will lead you to develop these beliefs and attitudes, and then those beliefs and attitudes can affect the way that you actually live in the world. Moral reasoning is another of these critical components. It's the one that Kohlberg focused on exclusively. And these changes in reasoning, like our rationale about what things are fair, how things should be, those come a lot from the experiences that we have in childhood. So early childhood, middle childhood. Also the neurological development that we get helps a lot too. So if we see a child, let's say we take a 5-year-old who watches another child take their blocks and start building a tower. So the 5-year-old might not be able to take the perspective of that child just wants to play. And they might get really mad at that child, right? So a middle or late child might say, oh, they want some blocks too, they want to play, here they can have these ones, maybe have a more positive or pro-social experience there. So from parents, teachers, mentors, we can positively reinforce, we can model, we can discuss the appropriate behaviors that should exist and our rationale for why those are the thing, right? So that will help improve young children's moral reasoning as well as middle and late childhood. Moral identity is another critical component of moral development. It's not really in play until very late in childhood and really early adolescence when we're starting to develop an actual identity. Essentially, self-concept, you'll see later, kind of evolves and becomes identity. So we've talked about sense of self, how we perceive ourselves. We've got today to having a lot clearer self-concept with self-esteem, conceptions about ourselves in specific domains, those kinds of things. Later on, you'll see adolescents start to develop an identity. One of those kinds of identities can be a moral identity, or seeing yourself as centrally a moral being. So Superman's on this picture because in most iterations of the comics, he generally sees himself as a moral being. And so a lot of his behavior is based on that. So being moral, having moral values, and that those perspectives are very central to the way you see yourself and your worldview in general. So let's skip this for now. This is basically the things that change a sense of self into a moral identity, and this is the process that kind of happens towards adolescence. So we talked a lot about self today, so yeah, it's relevant enough. So with that, we take that moral reasoning, we integrate these values that are being developed in childhood to ourself. We have our own personal concerns that we have that are moral. We have reflection on past things, prospection into things of how we might act in the future if we ever come across those kinds of situations. We commit to long-term goals in later childhood and adolescence. We take more responsibility for ourselves. So again, a lot of these things are happening after that middle and late childhood period, but that middle and late childhood period has built this sense of self and started to build this moral reasoning further out. And those things can coalesce into a full-on moral identity. So a adolescent or young adult who sees themselves as a moral person going about doing moral things. So another important component of this is moral character. So this is specific. You could think of this like personality traits, so kind of like moral personality characteristics. They're unique, enduring ways that we tend to behave pro-socially. So a stable disposition to respond in maybe moral ways. So you might say someone's an honest person. That would be a characteristic, a moral characteristic. They're an honest person, or they're a helpful person. That's what we're talking about here with moral character. Another couple ones, that person's a responsible person, or that's a very respectful or loyal person. Those are all characteristics that we would define as moral characteristics. So what you should be seeing here is that the current view of moral development is has lots more facets to it. Kohlberg thought that reasoning was a really critical component, and it is one critical component, but moral characteristics, moral emotions, moral values, all of these pieces combine and are important for actual moral behavior. So moral behavior that we're talking about is generally synonymous, not always, but usually synonymous with pro-social behavior. So pro-social, you can break that down into its component parts. So pro, it's like pro-society or pro-others, pro-social environment that you live in. So think about that and try to think for just a minute, maybe pause the video. Try to think of 3 examples of pro-social behavior. So what are some ways that you could act pro-socially or for others? So examples of pro-social behavior, pause for a second and think about them. All right, so hopefully you thought of a few. Ones that I commonly get in classes are like helping someone with holding a door open. Helping someone with car troubles on the side of the road. So, but pro-social behaviors can be all the way up to getting involved in maybe a local election or cleaning up a park. So things that are pro-society, pro-others, they can be little, they can be big. But yeah, moral behaviors, pro-social behaviors, usually we're using those synonymously. So they generally develop in the same way that other behaviors develop. So a behavior of, or maybe a habit of sucking your thumb as a child, that can develop, and moral behaviors kind of develop in the same way. Moral or a behavior to, or a habit to read will develop in the same way as a pro-social behavior can. So the processes by which a behavior can become a habit are the same in which moral behaviors can become habits. So one of those is behaviorism. So reinforcement, punishment, so positive reinforcement, getting rewarded or seeing positive outcomes for pro-social behavior makes it more likely that a young person will do those things again. Sociocognitive things, so having models, role models, mentors that do pro-social things makes it more likely. If you train young children specifically within their zone of proximal development to be more helpful, to be more pro-social, to do things for other people, if they see their parents consistently doing good for others, the likelihood that they will do behaviors that are pro-social, pro-other people is higher as well as demonstrating warmth. There's also bioecological systems. So the context that a young person are in will affect what behaviors they can and cannot engage in that are pro-social. if they're low SES, they might have a more limited capacity to donate to things, but they might see other capacities to physically interact or something like that. There's also bidirectional relations with, say, the school. Is the school climate really positive and pro-social, or is there a lot of bullying in that school? Is cheating the only way to get ahead in that school? So if that's the school that they're at, they will see those immoral behaviors and go with those rather than necessarily the more moral behaviors. So we can increase, on average, without any explicit training like socio-emotional learning, on average, pro-social behavior does increase across childhood and through adolescence. So supports for children are, for younger children especially, focus on sharing things, talk about what other people need. So this is one that socio-emotional learning programs do a lot, is talk about what other people's needs and wants and desires are. And then also service in the classrooms and community. And usually schools implement this better in, say, high school, doing service learning or senior projects that require you to get out in the community and actually do pro-social actions for others. So a lot of research has focused on problems throughout development. So disorders, disabilities, a lot of developmental research has focused on those kinds of things. So there's a lot of room and a lot of questions that we still have around pro-social behavior and moral development generally. How can we help people become better people to help other people? How can we do that to improve school context? How can we do that to improve communities? How can we improve race relations? How can we improve the socioeconomic situations of people? How can we use these abilities of empathy and moral emotions, moral values? How can we improve those and make more positive and pro-social people in the world? So that's a lot of the research that I'm focused on. There's a lot of room and a lot of work to be done in that area, especially because there's only really been a shift in focus to these more positive and thriving aspects on that developmental cascade more recently. So currently we understand that all of these aspects, all of these pieces, that moral reasoning, those moral emotions, the moral characteristics, all of these pieces fit together to develop morality. And so we'll talk about these again coming into future chapters as well, but hopefully this gives you a better broad overview of where we're at today with our understanding of moral development. So most behavior, let's go back to talking to Kohlberg for a minute. Most behavior, most moral behavior, most of all of our behaviors actually, are not actually reasoned out in that moment, as Kohlberg thought. Rather, usually our behaviors are very instinctual. So they're essentially habits that we've built over our lifespan. This is true for middle children, late children, adolescents, adults. We've built these patterns of how we will act. Are we a person who will open the door for a person behind us? If we are, and we've done that every day of our lives, we are very likely just to do that out of habit. If we've never done it at all, ever in our lives, then we probably won't open the door for the person behind us. If we stop and think about it for a second, we might now choose to do that, right? Or choose not to do that. But generally, we spend most of our life just going off of those habits. And we've talked about habits in previous chapters on neurology, so hopefully these ideas are connecting. Moral behaviors, pro-social behaviors, are a habit that we can build in people. So from early childhood all the way through middle and late childhood, adolescence, adulthood, late adulthood. So if we develop these habits based on our previous decisions, our previous rationale, so we can sit down and imagine, if I came up against this situation where I saw bullying, or maybe I saw my boss stealing money, or maybe for a kid, if one of my friends stole another friend's toy, what would I do in that situation? So we can use moral reasoning, like Kohlberg thought, and decide what should be done in that situation, what is right, what is moral. But we'll also apply things like our moral values, our moral behaviors that we've done in the past. And based on that, we will over time develop habits that are somewhere on that spectrum of morality, of doing really pro-social behavior or antisocial behavior. So, is it your habit to open the door for people? Is it your habit to act pro-socially in general? So if not, and you want it to be, then those things can be, you can train yourself to have that habit. And so that's one thing that I try to do in my research, is look for ways to help people be more pro-social, build those habits. So when a situation comes up where they have to be, say, even heroic, they will have that capacity, that self-efficacy, that they can do it. And remember, all of this development in moral development is happening as everything else is developing. So the neurology, those neural networks, those are developing at the same time as they're being impacted by parents, they're being impacted by their peers, their parents' marriage or their parents' work, by their school, their teacher, the community they live in, the society and culture overall. And so all these contexts and settings can be interacting and affecting these young people as they're developing these pro-social tendencies. All right, so let's change gears. We spent a lot more time in this lecture than the book does talking about moral development. Let's talk about socio-emotional gender differences. But before we get too far into there, I do want to clarify here, sex and gender are two different things. So with this, the book is saying these are gender differences between different genders, but sometimes it's also a sex difference. So the book isn't super clear about it. The bullet point facts that I'm going to say aren't always super clear if it's a gender difference or a gender and a sex difference or just a sex difference. So with that, go to the original papers. If you have questions, just ask me for references, and I can send you to the original papers and original findings, or use your newfound skills with Google Scholar and PsycInfo and look up the research. It's sometimes hard to tell, especially with older papers, are they actually talking about sex differences or are they talking about gender differences? So sorry about that confusion. The field in general are working on it, getting better at making sure we're talking about, is this a gender difference? Is this a sex difference? Is this both a gender and sex difference? So just want to make that clear here. So in that realm, aggression, boys tend to be more physically aggressive. This is true across a lot of cultures, and it is true from early childhood all the way through middle childhood. Girls tend to have more verbal aggression than boys, but only in some studies. This doesn't always show up. Relational aggression is harming someone by manipulating a relationship. So saying something bad or spreading gossip about one of the friends, trying to hurt them relationally, cutting off friends, stopping some friends from seeing other friends, that's relational aggression. So with that, some studies show that girls do more of that. You might think of this movie Mean Girls as a good example of relational, or as having a lot of good examples of relational aggression. But other studies do show no gender difference at all for relational aggression. So emotions. Females express more emotions than males generally, and also better at recognizing emotions on the face and nonverbal. So from body language as well as facial expressions, they do a better job guessing or identifying what emotion that is more accurately. For prosocial behavior, on average, females do more prosocial behavior. Sharing behaviors in early and middle childhood are about equal between boys and girls, and kind and considerate behavior is more common for females. So again, those gender differences, some of those are also sex differences, some of those are both. So let me know if you want more detail on any of those. So let's talk about families, because it's still one of the critical components of the socio and emotional world of middle and late children. So in this time, moving from early childhood into middle childhood, parents are going to be spending less one-on-one time with those children. So that's for a lot of reasons. So one is they might be in school full-time now. They might be doing extracurricular activities. They're also wanting to play with friends. So parents are still really, really important, though, in the child's life at this time. The parents generally in middle and late childhood are the ones that are structuring the time of the child's life. So, yep, you have these extracurricular activities, you have school these days, you'll play with friends on the weekend, things like that, managing a child's life. So parents can still have a huge impact on the academic achievement of their middle and late children, the sports or clubs, the activities that the children are involved in. So parents are still very, very central to the socio-emotional world of middle and late children. Parent relationships are shifting, or should be at this time, shifting more to a managerial relationship. So over middle and late childhood, and then especially into adolescence, parents should be giving children more and more and more responsibility over time. And then the parents are really the managers over that time, over the schedule, over the opportunities that those children and adolescents have. So managing starts to become a really important part here in middle and late childhood, and it is really essential that it exists into adolescence. So parents should be managing rather than a direct control over their child. So as an example, my child who's in early childhood, I will literally pick them up and put them in their high chair and buckle them in when it's time to eat. So that's a lot of direct involvement. I'm literally picking them up and putting them in place to eat food, versus an adolescent should be able to manage that, and a parent should allow them to manage that a lot more themselves. They might still be purchasing the food, maybe even making a lot of the food, but by that time, that is kind of how these relationships should be shifting to encourage and teach a young person to manage their own lives. So structures around family environment should exist. So bedtimes in middle and late childhood might still exist. Meal times, chores might be a big piece of the managing of a household. And then monitoring of behavior and emotions. So for my slightly older child who's just at the beginning of middle childhood, I do monitor her behavior and her emotions. I can tell when she's starting to get upset sometimes. Sometimes it seems to go 0 to 1,000 just like that, right? So, but I still try to monitor that. And for my child in early childhood, I'm trying to monitor that as well, right? To help them learn, to scaffold them, and teaching them in how to control their emotions, how to regulate those. If they're really upset because their balloon just popped, well, let's solve that problem. Yes, the balloon popped, but there's literally a giant bag of balloons over there. You can get a new one. So patiently talking to them, helping them manage those emotions, take some breaths, and then solve the problem, helping scaffold them so they're able to do that on their own later on in life. So parents managing in the family relationships allows children to have more freedom, to make more choices themselves, to do more things. Sometimes they might make mistakes, but they can gain capacities. And if you remember back to the beginning of today's lecture, they will be gaining more self-efficacy. They will realize, oh, I am capable of XYZ. With a parent managing, supporting, and scaffolding, they will gain new capacities. They will feel good about those capacities they've gained. They will have those capacities later on. They'll have higher self-esteem. And so scaffolding them and building those capacities with the support of a managerial parent in this kind of situation is really essential for positive development in middle and late childhood. So let them try new things. Let them fail at things. Let them try again. Encourage them, teach them, scaffold them, support them. So that's what the kind of parent-child relationship should be in middle through late childhood. And then once you get into adolescence, it's going to be even one more step back, right? Where the adolescent should be managing even more. But we'll talk in a lot more detail about parents and adolescents later on. So oftentimes children in late childhood are a lot more capable than their parents believe them to be. So this is a common problem across the Western world, is that there's a lot more direct involvement even into late childhood and even into adolescence than is really necessary. Late children, adolescents are very capable of doing a lot of things on their own, not to be just left out to the wolves, but still supported, still managed, still monitored, but allowed to make choices, allowed to make mistakes, allowed to try new things. So young people are a lot more capable than, I think, on average. So, well, not I think. The research shows, on average, most parents are more directly involved than they really should be. So obviously that might not be the case for you and your children or for your parents and yourselves, but on average, most parents in the U.S. tend to be more directly involved than they need to be, especially into later childhood and adolescence. So let's talk about another really important context. And peers is a very important context in middle and late childhood, and it becomes even more important into adolescence. So to develop positive peer relationships is really essential for young people in middle and late childhood to learn to resolve conflicts in non-aggressive ways. So we do that by things like play and having differences in what you want to play and figuring that out yourself. So again, this is an example of with my child that's in middle childhood, I try to do more of letting her choose how to resolve those conflicts rather than being directly involved, saying, well, you need to share this and you should share this because look at your sister's face, and so on and so forth. So having conversations, middle and late children, they're able to take people's perspectives better. So telling them your perspective or the perspective of their peer, conversing about that, talking about it after it's already happened. How do you think Susie felt when Jimmy did XYZ? How do you think Jimmy felt when Susie did XYZ? Demonstrating pro-social behavior, encouraging pro-social behavior, building social knowledge. So as an example, if a child is not picking up on maybe the facial expression of their peers, helping encourage them to see what those facial expressions are, identify them, choose what to do based on those facial expressions. And this is also a good time for young people to be testing out new roles and behaviors and thoughts, figuring out how to manage these relationships. And if they're having that opportunity in a good, well-monitored environment in middle and late childhood, they'll do a lot better in adolescence. They'll do a lot better with these kinds of similar things of resolving conflict or testing out roles or managing relationships when it's a romantic relationship later on in life, as an example, or a marriage relationship later on in their adulthood. So we mentioned peer status earlier on. Now we're going to talk about it in more detail. So popular children, those are the children that are frequently nominated as best friend. So if you ask everybody in a classroom, the popular children are those ones that get the most check marks as best friend. Like Susie's everybody's best friend. They're a popular child. They're often rarely disliked. So children who are more popular tend to have good social skills, and that also helps children get to be the popular children. So it's a bidirectional interaction there. If they have good social skills, they're more likely to become the popular child. And if they are popular, they tend to have more interactions with other children, so they will tend to develop better social skills as well. So giving things like positive reinforcement, maintaining lines of communication with their peers, those will help for this. Generally, popular children are happy and they control their negative emotions better. They have a lot more enthusiasm and concern for other peers, and they're self-confident but not conceited. So average children, these are children in the classroom that would get about an average number of positive and negative nominations. So with that, neglected children are those that are very infrequently nominated as a best friend, but they are also not disliked by their peers. So you might think of this as a child who's in the corner. Not that nobody does that, people are dislike them, but they're not really the best friend of anybody. Controversial children are frequently nominated as someone's best friend, but they are also very frequently nominated as very much disliked by other students. So you might think back to your own childhood experience and try to place the children you knew or some examples of children you knew in these categories. Then rejected children are infrequently nominated as someone's best friend and actively disliked by peers. So rather than getting positive rankings, they're getting a lot of negative rankings by their classmates. So these rejected children oftentimes have significant adjustment problems. Higher depression, higher conduct problems, aggressiveness is more likely. And you can see maybe how this might be related to the fact that if they are not having a lot of friendship interactions, they're not learning the skills to solve conflict as maybe a popular child would have the capacity to or the opportunity to resolve conflicts. This rejected child might only know now how to solve conflicts aggressively rather than learning and having other experiences. So being angry, they may be more impulsive and that might turn off peers being their friends. And so this bidirectional interaction here, so for the popular child, we had that positive upward spiral basically. So they have good social skills, they become the popular kid, they get more opportunities to practice those social skills, they become more popular, those kinds of things. This is opposite of that. They don't have those social skills, so they are rejected, then they don't get to develop more social skills, so they still have worse social skills than their peers, and so it's just a negative downward spiral. So this is an example of that developmental cascade. For being a rejected child, the tendency or the possibility would be to go towards maybe some negative outcomes versus a popular child towards some positive outcomes. So there's ways to support this, change that, teaching them socio-emotional learning, how to understand, how to regulate emotions for rejected children, giving opportunities for positive social experience. So what are the functions of friendships, especially in middle and late childhood? So one of the main ones is companionship. So a playmate at this time is a partner who's willing to spend time on the same activities that you are. In middle childhood, my friends were the ones who wanted to play Jurassic Park and dinosaurs with me. So we wanted to play that, and so the ones who would do that, they were my companions in doing that. Stimulation as well. Friendship provides a lot more interesting information for a young person. So new information, stories from friends, excitement, amusement. Friend spits milk out their nose. That's really funny, right? So having friends provides a lot of stimulation for a young person's brain, and it's interesting and useful. Physical support. Friends can also provide time and resources and assistance physically. So a friend in middle or late childhood might help with homework or carry a bag or help you with your skinned knee, something like that. They're also a good ego support. Some of these do apply to adulthood as well, just in different ways. Ego support though, feedback from friends is really helpful. It can help children see how competent they are, as they're seeing their friend's facial expression, what their friend says, how their friends interact with them. It can help them improve their social interaction so they'll do better or worse job. So social comparison. Having friends and having peers around lets you compare yourself to them socially and lets you see, okay, they're regulating their emotions, or they have lots of friends. Why do they have lots of friends or more than me? Is what I'm doing okay? Is what I'm doing weird? Is what I'm doing cool? That social comparison is important. And also affection and intimacy. And so we're talking about here intimacy in the sense of sharing things with other people. So disclosing information about yourself. So intimacy is that closeness and warmth with someone. So we're not talking physical intimacy in this case. We're talking about intimacy, sharing your secrets, sharing your dreams and your hopes, self-disclosing, trust. You can share your private thoughts with your friends. It may or may not be a feature of children's relationships, especially middle childhood into later childhood and adolescence. It generally becomes more of an important part of it. It's not uncommon to see intimacy and that level of closeness and sharing until adolescence. So it should definitely exist within friendships there in adolescence, and you might see it in middle childhood, more likely in later childhood, but definitely should exist into adolescence. All right, so these peer relationships, let's talk about bullying for a second. Boys, on average, are more likely to be bullies. Boys and younger children, especially younger boys, are more likely to be the victims of bullies. Bullies are often in the same classes as the victims in a school context. Other students are often bystanders to these situations, so seeing what's happening and not doing things to step in. Victims of bullying are often socially withdrawn, anxious, they can be aggressive, so you might go through some of those examples of the type of children and think of who might be more likely to be the victims. Probably not the popular children, and probably not the rejected children either. It can be rejected children though. So outcomes for bullying can be depression, difficulty making friends, more agoraphobia, lower self-esteem, poor school performance, and even suicide. So there's a lot of work being done to try and combat bullying, especially in school contexts. So cyberbullying can actually be worse than in-person physical taunting, joking, pushing, hurting. So cyberbullying can actually be a lot worse for a lot of these outcomes. So a lot of schools have tried to do programs to stop bullying, and there are some that have shown some really good positive benefits. We'll talk about some of the key pieces of that. If you want to know more about like anti-bullying programs, going to that CASEL website and their research, just searching in bullying, you'll be able to find a lot more research articles about bullying, but we're going to hit some of the main points here. So a single program or assembly, like once a year, having a maybe anti-bullying week even, where everybody has like ribbons, you hear an assembly like once that week, or there's a video about not being a bully, that's not going to do essentially anything. It might have an effect over that week, maybe into the next week, but it's not going to make long-term change for very many, if any, students. So there needs to be an entire school culture change with the teachers, administrators, and many kids on board with creating the school or making the school be a positive pro-social environment. So having a positive school environment is one of the biggest things, and that takes a lot more than just one assembly on not bullying. That can take changing the whole environment of the school, putting up posters all year round, for example, rather than just during that week. Having focus on bullying and anti-bullying and being positive and respectful to people all throughout the year rather than just that one week or that one day. So socio-emotional learning and character education are other programs that try to infuse an entire school with change. So with that, you need to change that whole school culture rather than just those individual assemblies or programs or week-long focuses. You need to have a change in the entire school to be focused on being a safe, respectful, responsible, helpful place for everybody involved. All right, so let's jump over to another topic relevant here is mindsets. So mindsets are also a big piece, very related to socio-emotional learning, and they're really popular right now in talking about middle and late childhood. So growth mindsets are a mindset or a way you view yourself that your qualities are changeable and can improve over time. You might see how that's related to self-efficacy. So you believe that you can change things about yourself to maybe do better in math or do better in science. A fixed mindset is that belief that your qualities are not changeable, maybe carved in stone. So let's watch this shorter animated video. There's a good TED Talk also on this if you want a little more detail. And Carol Dweck is one of the big first researchers who looked into this topic. So it's a really good one. It's just a little bit long, and I think we can get what we need to know from it from this shorter video.
Researcher and professor Carol Dweck uses the term mindset to describe the way people think about ability and talent. Dweck delineates between two different mindsets that exist on a continuum. The first is the fixed mindset, which suggests that your abilities are innate and unchangeable. The second is a growth mindset, which views it as something you can improve through practice. In a fixed mindset, you view failure as permanent, but with a growth mindset, you see failure as a chance to learn and even pivot. Those with a fixed mindset are more likely to view critical feedback as a personal attack, while those with a growth mindset will see it as a chance to improve, where they can develop new systems. With a fixed mindset, you're more likely to choose easier tasks and put in minimal effort. After all, if talent is fixed, why bother improving? Why even try? But with a growth mindset, you're more likely to embrace challenging tasks and work hard to improve. Those with a fixed mindset are likely to give up when they face an obstacle. Meanwhile, those with a growth mindset will view obstacles as a chance to experiment and solve problems. In a fixed mindset, the focus is on measurable accomplishments. But with a growth mindset, the focus is more on a journey of continual improvement. With a fixed mindset, you're less likely to take creative risks. But with a growth mindset, creative risks are simply a way to innovate and improve. Ultimately, your mindset influences everything from creative risk-taking to how you view feedback to whether or not you finish difficult tasks. And in the end, it's one of the greatest factors in determining whether or not you grow and improve in your abilities.
So one thing I'll mention from that video, it talks about at the end, it's one of the greatest factors in whether you do grow or change and improve in your abilities. For a while, growth mindset was, for lack of a better word, a big fad in education. So there was a lot of focus on trying to improve young people's mindsets, give young people growth mindsets, and that would be like the cure-all magic bullet, one easy fix that we could change everything with. And the benefits that it talked about in that video are accurate. Young people with growth mindsets do tend to do better academically. They tend to have better self-efficacy, because essentially if you've got a growth mindset, if you're changing and improving, you're improving that self-efficacy, self-esteem. So it definitely does help, but it is not a magic bullet. It's not the end-all be-all to fix every single problem that a young person ever has. So for a time, there were a lot of really big claims made about mindsets. They are useful, they are valuable. Growth mindset's definitely better than a fixed mindset for a lot of reasons, but it's not the end-all be-all cure-all for everything. So do watch where you're getting sources from that, especially if you're wanting to do, say, a question paper. Like I said, it kind of became a fad. It left some of the research and rigorous aspects of that behind when people kind of started taking it. So it is still a useful thing. It's still positive. All the positives that they talk about are still useful. The effect size is just a little smaller than maybe originally was hoped it would be. So some key things to improve growth mindsets, to help create a growth mindset in a young person, are to not only praise success, but also praise trying. So when a young person is trying really hard, is working, even if they're failing, if they're making changes and trying hard, that's something to be encouraged. We want young people to try. We want to scaffold them. We also want them to use growth mindset language. A lot of the like in-school activities focus on this. So rather than saying, oh, I'm not going to do well on that test, I don't take tests well, say, I haven't learned to take tests well, or I need to learn to take tests well. So language like, I haven't learned that yet, or I can get better, or I'll get it soon. Those will be very helpful for improving growth mindsets. Mindset can pervade a lot of different contexts, not just academic ones. So I can improve my relationships with my friends, those kinds of things. So family growth and development, new talents and abilities. I can learn how to play the guitar. I honestly just have to practice it, and I never have time to practice it. So maybe a little personal one there. New jobs and training. I can do better at this. I can learn this difficult skill. I can learn to Photoshop a meme better than anybody else in the world, right? Something like that. So as a parent, as a teacher, as a mentor, as a role model, we can model a growth mindset for young people. We can use that kind of language. We can demonstrate that we believe in ourselves, that we can change, right? That we can improve in different ways. And that will help middle and late children to do that as well. So it's very, very correlated with self-efficacy. If you are improving, if you are making changes, if you're seeing those having an effect, your self-efficacy will be higher. So that is the end of this chapter. In-person class, we would look at the study guide for the exam. The study guide is in the online classes, are already up on the delivery board for our classes. So that is our chapter on middle and late childhood socio-emotional development. We'll jump forward into adolescence really soon. So I'm glad you were here with me to talk about middle and late childhood socio-emotional development today.